So the talks are always about the same topic, and the topic is actually very specific and very narrow. Um, so if anyone were listening for the first time and might be thinking, oh, I wonder what this is all about. Well, up front, and it's the same with all the talks. The talks are about happiness in daily living for the human being, for you and I, in this life, not in some future life. I'll let the future person living that future life worry about happiness in that life. What I'm interested in is happiness for Roger in this life. And so if the talks are about happiness in daily living, which they are, it's important for us to define happiness in daily living, because the word happiness is exactly that. It's a word, and everyone has their own definitions for all of their words. Sometimes the definition matches what the dictionary definition is, and sometimes it's different. But we go round with our definition, and until we hold, sometimes we can have several definitions for one word in different contexts. But if we're not clear on our own definition of the word happiness, we will just subscribe whatever our definition is at that point in time, which we might not even have thought about. And generally speaking, and maybe even what is in the dictionary may not be the happiness that I'm speaking about. I don't know what the definition in the dictionary is, and different dictionaries are going to have different definitions. So let's define it up front so we know what the talks are about. In this context, these talks, happiness for the human being doesn't mean a feeling of excitement or a feeling of joy or a feeling of pleasure because you are on holiday, because you are eating great food, because you are seeing a friend that you haven't seen for a long time, or you're partaking in some activity that makes you feel good. That would be pleasure in daily living for the human being. Now, no doubt, pleasure is pleasurable. It is more pleasurable than pain. Pain would be if you are spending time with someone that you don't like spending time with. If you are tasting food that doesn't meet your preferences, if the weather is too hot, if an event that you were looking forward to gets cancelled. They're examples of pain. Now, happiness is something quite different to the pleasure or pain of circumstance. Happiness in this context means, or is always found on one's level of attitude to circumstance. So we can have an attitude of uncomfortableness, or a feeling of uncomfortableness because of a certain attitude to the flow of life. And we feel uncomfortable, which is unhappiness in this context. We feel uncomfortable with ourself ultimately. So unhappiness is an uncomfortableness with oneself, and happiness is a comfortableness with oneself, given the circumstance, whatever the circumstance happens to be, either pleasure or pain. And it is the attitude of personal doership and attachment to outcomes. So when we have a particular attitude, so we should ask the question, what is the attitude to the flow of life, which means towards circumstance as it's unfolding? What is the attitude towards circumstance that leads to an uncomfortableness with oneself? And the answer is, it's the attitude of personal doership, and you could call it, let's say, a sub-attitude under the attitude of personal doership, attachment to outcomes. And when is that the attitude that we have towards life? It's the attitude, and it's fairly consistent. So we either have this attitude and it's there all the time, or we have an alternate attitude, and the alternate attitude is the attitude of non-doership and non-attachment, which really is just the absence of this attitude that I'm speaking about now. So what is the attitude that leads to uncomfortableness? It's the attitude of personal doership and attachment to outcome, and it comes from a deeply ingrained way of seeing life and seeing oneself and seeing the other. And that you could call the standard way of seeing life and seeing oneself that has been put in place as part of our human development. So it's fair to say, in general, that when a person is conceived and that they start growing, and then a baby forms, and then the baby is born, and then the baby develops and goes through phases of development where, for example, the intellect becomes more equipped and language is formed, and then a sense of self is formed. And it's fair to say that as part of that development, a sense of self that sees life as, this environment we're in, and we are the ones, I am the one that needs to control life, and I do control life. I control my speaking, my actions, my behaviors, my emotions, and because I believe that I control my thoughts and therefore my actions, then I see a direct link to the outcomes and say, well, essentially, the outcome is my doing, because the action was my doing and the thought is my doing. So this is an interpretation, you could say, this attitude of personal doership. It's a way of interpreting what happens, or rather, it is an overlay onto what happens, and that overlay is sort of our understanding of why it happened or how it happened in very basic principle. And the very basic principle is the principle of personal doership, which says I am an autonomous entity that, because of my autonomy, which means that I am a separate, independent entity, not influenced or controlled by anything. I am my own autonomous, sovereign being that has complete free will over whatever I do in the moment, and whatever I think in the moment, and whatever I feel in the moment. That is the attitude of personal doership. Now, it has nothing to do with what you say, how you feel, how you act. That is the circumstance unfolding. You are part of the circumstance. That is part of the flow of life unfolding. So what you say in the moment, how you behave in the moment, how you feel in the moment, is all part of the flow of life. Now, the attitude of personal doership is how that which is happening, or that which has happened, is interpreted, is seen. And so if the belief in personal doership, I am a separate, autonomous entity that is in complete control of everything I think, say, and do, then if that's how we believe or what we believe ourselves to be, our attitude is going to be an overlay that says, I did that, I thought that, I felt that. And I could have thought differently, I could have felt differently, I could have acted differently. And that attitude towards life, so if that's in place, it doesn't sort of change. On Monday we think we're the doer, and then on Tuesday we don't have the attitude of personal doership, and then on Wednesday we've got the attitude of personal doership again. It doesn't shift around like that unless we're in the middle of the process where a transition is happening. But let's say a spiritual seeking process isn't happening, then someone has developed as into a, let's say, adolescent or teenager or adult, And generally speaking, this deeply ingrained belief of personal doership is part of our psychology. We can call that the psychological me. The I am the doer of everything that happens in life, everything that happens through this body-mind organism. So I am essentially completely responsible for everything that happens. That is the attitude of personal doership. And so you wouldn't expect it to change on Tuesday unless life delivers reason for it to change. And the spiritual seeking process is a process in which, meaning it's a life project, let's say, that we take on, some of us take on at some point. And within that project, we could expect the attitude to start changing. Just like if you take on a project of, I don't know, going to the gym every day for 6 months when you've never gone before. So when you haven't gone before, you don't expect your muscles to just start growing. And then when you start going to the gym and that's the project, well, then it's likely that in that situation that your muscles will start getting stronger. And so in the spiritual seeking project of life, it is possible, and because of the activities, the information that is coming in, that our attitude will change from the attitude of personal doership to the falling away of that attitude. And that's simply a matter of our experience and our observation of life delivering essentially new information that changes the structure of our information bank. And our information bank makes up the sense of, is part of what makes up who I believe myself to be. So at some point we might have a revelation because we have been guided to look at life in a particular way, and it might just hit us. I simply cannot be the doer. Life is a happening. Life is a happening according to God's will, for example. You don't have to take on God's this notion of God's will. However, the notion of God's will is very powerful as a substitute for me as the doer. Now, I don't suggest that that should be some sort of religious belief that you just take on and say, oh, it's not my will, it's God's will. What I see as being much more powerful is if we investigate the actual mechanics of life and come to see for ourselves that so many of the functions and dynamics that we assumed, or the results of which we assumed were my doing, turn out to be something very different. Turn out to be automatic functions that I have no control over, and they deliver an output. And if the output is a result of automatic functions that I previously hadn't seen, and so previously it was assumed that the output was something that I, and we have to inquire into what this I is when we say I did this. If we didn't see the mechanical dynamics that led to the output, then there was space for this psychological me to come in and claim ownership over the output and say, well, I did that. And as the human being starts to see that these outputs that were believed to be the doing of an autonomous entity, as it's seen that those outputs are actually the result of mechanical process, that's the sort of revelation, the sort of new way of seeing things that could lead to an insight in a moment when life conspires or lines up in a certain way that the understanding that has been developed suddenly clicks into place. Maybe because of something that's just happened that just highlights the fact that this is all automatic, happening as a result of factors that were before me, or factors that I was not in control of. And in that moment, there can be this explanation: I simply cannot be the doer. Now, I hope that it's clear, given I'm harping on about this belief in personal doership, that it's significant. Why is it significant? If we were trying to solve certain other objectives, then the belief in personal doership is quite possibly not relevant to figuring out clean energy sources, or figuring out new social structures that work better than the ones we have, figuring out how to provide food and water for more people in the world. Those objectives have specific factors that are important to understand. And so if that's the objective, we would be hopefully understanding the landscape of that objective and seeing what needs to be improved, what factors are important, how much money is available, what technology is available, what commitment from people is available, how important the outcome is to the people directly affected and the people who are going to have to contribute to the solution. So, and in assessing all of that, then you could come up with a plan. And personal doership, understanding whether we are the doers or whether life is happening, is probably completely irrelevant for most practical tasks that we're trying to find solutions for. However, when it comes to happiness for the human being, it's virtually the only relevant topic, or the only relevant factor. Why? So we need to know why. And the reason is that human unhappiness, when we start to become familiar with it, is all based on this deeply ingrained attitude, which really means a deeply ingrained conclusion, a deeply ingrained belief of how and what the human being is. So if all of the forms of human unhappiness are based on this belief in personal doership, we should ask whether it's true. And if it is true, then what we have to conclude is that happiness for the human being is not available. So what is happiness for the human being? Happiness for the human being is something very specific. It's peace of mind, regardless of the circumstance that we find ourselves in. And what does peace of mind mean? Peace of mind is the absence of the suffering, and both peace of mind and suffering are always attitudinal. So if you bang your leg and break a bone, that's going to be physically painful. The attitude of personal doership, or the attitude where that personal doership belief has fallen away, which we can call the attitude of non-doership, but let's be clear, it's the dissolving of the attitude of doership rather than a belief that says, I am not the doer. So the attitude of doership is a belief that says, I am the doer. The concept, I am not the doer, can be useful for a period of time while that belief of I am the doer is being weakened. But at the point where we say the attitude of non-doership has set in, what is most significant is that the belief that I am the doer has dissolved. It isn't replaced with a new belief that says, I am not the doer. And you might say, well, that's strange. If you have an attitude of personal doership, which is the belief I am the doer, then the attitude of non-doership must be the belief that you are not the doer. And in fact, it doesn't have to be that way because of what happiness is. Happiness is just the absence of the uncomfortable feelings that arise from the belief of personal doership. So it doesn't need to be replaced with another belief, it just needs to be dissolved. I'm sure we can think of an example of if there's a smell in the house. The smell doesn't require us to have a counter source for the smell to go away. So if we figure out that it's some dirty water that is stagnating, what needs to happen is the water needs to be removed. And if the water is removed, the smell goes with it. And the belief in personal doership is just like that. It doesn't require a new belief that says, I am not the doer. So let's look at the different forms of human unhappiness. And the talks are descriptions, they're notions, they're concepts. So everything I say is a concept. They are pointers, essentially. Pointers for your working mind to understand. When your working mind understands it, it means the information has been absorbed, at least intellectually, and then it can be observed for yourself. And the laboratory is your own daily life. So the description of what human unhappiness is something that hopefully you can start to check out for yourself. You can start off by becoming clear that in a particular moment, it's obvious, in a particular moment, you could say, I am not happy. Right now, I am not happy. Now, I don't know what my unhappiness is. I haven't checked it out. I haven't looked yet. But I can tell you that intuitively, I know I'm not happy in this moment. Now, I'm talking about in a particular moment when it's very clear to you. And then investigate what is going on. And you'll find that the unhappiness generally is coinciding with a circumstance, with an outcome. Someone was meant to pick you up, and 10 minutes after they were meant to pick you up, they send you a nonchalant message saying that, oh, I'm not able to pick you up. And let's say you were going to the airport. And so there's a circumstance that is problematic. It's not in line with your preferences, so we can call it pain in the moment. And so if that happened in the moment, you could say, yes, in this moment I am not happy. And on an initial investigation, it would seem like the unhappiness is because of circumstance. So we would say my happiness is directly linked and because of painful circumstance. So we might think that our unhappiness is the equivalent of pain in the moment. That's what it looks like on the surface. And if you drew that conclusion and then the next time you said, in this moment I'm not happy, and you find it's once again because of a circumstance that someone, let's say you left your computer outside and it started to rain and your computer is broken. And you can say, in this moment I am not happy. And it seems like it's because of the circumstance. If we look more closely, what we'll find is the circumstance itself is either pleasurable or painful. And the unhappiness is not the pleasure or pain of the circumstance, but rather the extra load of uncomfortableness on top of the pain of the circumstance. And that uncomfortableness, when we look at it, is either guilt or blame or pride or worry or expectation. So in the situation where the person sends you a message 10 minutes after they're meant to pick you up, you will find the uncomfortableness is the hatred towards the other, which means the blame towards the other for not respecting you, for and all of the consequences that it's going to have. So the pain is that you might miss your flight, and it might cost you money, and you might not be able to go to the meeting that you were going to go to, or you'll be late to your holiday, you might not be able to meet up with your friend, whatever. There's going to be a circumstantial consequence. And that is likely to be pain because it's not in line with your preference. The unhappiness is the attitude towards the circumstance where, one, there is blame towards the other as the doer that says you should have and you could have done it differently. You didn't, and your actions have led to this pain. This pain is an attack on who I am. That's part of the psychological me that takes pain as an attack on who they are. And so you're attacking me, I hate you. Furthermore, your attack is an attack on my happiness, because the deeply ingrained attitude is my happiness is dependent on circumstance being a certain way. If that attitude were to fall away, if life is seen radically differently, then the circumstance would still happen. You would still find that you have trouble getting to the airport. You may miss your plane as you would have. The circumstance is the same, so everything circumstantially would be the same. Your attitude may be, well, it looks like this is destiny unfolding. It looks like this is what life was going to look like in this moment. And I've now found out what destiny in this moment is. And with that attitude, the hatred for the other as being a separate, independent entity that essentially is your competitor or your rival or your enemy has fallen away. And the other is seen as an instrument through which your destiny is being delivered. Your destiny being delivered is fundamentally by life, and specifically by life using the other as an instrument through which your destiny is being delivered. And it is their destiny for them to be the one that fails to pick you up. So your destiny and their destiny. And if you hate them, it is your destiny to hate them and their destiny to be hated. And if they then hate you back for hating them, then it is their destiny to hate you and your destiny to get further pain from them. Now, the hating them, which is the blaming them, is the suffering, is the unhappiness. If it wasn't there, we would have the pain of the circumstance and an acceptance that this is life unfolding. So attitudinally, there would be an acceptance. And that acceptance essentially means the absence of the non-acceptance. The non-acceptance is what we can call attachment to outcome. And the non-acceptance or attachment to outcome is based on the idea that life could look the way I want it to look. And because that person did whatever they did, now it doesn't look the way I want it to look. And it could have. Whereas the acceptance is when we understand life is essentially a predetermined story unfolding according to innumerable cause and effects that are impersonal, that are not controlled by me or the other, that have been put in motion 13.8 billion years ago, if we want to run with the Big Bang theory of life. And whatever happens in each moment is essentially the unfolding of the expanding universe. So the cause of the person not picking you up, essentially you could say, originates back to the Big Bang. And so it's from this perspective that we say this is the predetermined story of life unfolding. And if we can see life like this, which is not some wishful thinking. I mean, if it was wishful thinking and something we just have an inkling of, it really wouldn't be powerful enough to create an acceptance. There would be something one day where we go, who am I kidding? This just is not acceptable. Right? But if we see life this way down to our core and can't possibly understand life to be any other way, then whatever happens, the pain will be there. Anger in the moment might actually be there. However, on the level of attitude, we can't engender an attitude that sees life could have been different. Now that depends on whether we have, if life has changed us such that the way that we see the mechanics of life makes it clear that life is unfolding one way, and that one way is according to a force of nature that is outside of our control. In fact, we see that we are an expression of that overall force of nature. We are part of what is unfolding. Now, I mean, I've seen people trying to explain their areas of expertise to those that aren't exposed to the field that the expert is continually exposed to. So let's take, for example, something like neuroscience. A neuroscientist who is observing the dynamics of their field day in and day out and understanding it more and more and working in such a way that they are practically seeing changes as a result of certain causes, and certain causes have certain effects. And they, let's say, are understanding the topic on a base level, or at least a very detailed level. So they explain it to Joe Blow, and it makes sense that Joe Blow just can't wrap his head around what is being said. And so the neuroscientist who's, let's say, looking into the microscope or analyzing electrical data that is received from brain scans or whatever, is so familiar with seeing things a particular way that he can't unsee it. He can't not realize that a motor movement of a person is controlled by a particular center in the brain. Now, it's unquestionable for that person. It's like that's how it works. It has been observed over and over again in such a way that it is clear to that person that, for all intents and purposes, is the mechanics of things. And certain implications and conclusions are formed as a result of knowing that. And so the person hearing this doesn't have the same benefit of experience and observation. So it makes sense that they're not necessarily going to come to the same implications and conclusions. And so if we see life, if we look at life closely enough, and if certain explanations reveal the dynamics that are necessary for us to see, and we really see them, then we can't unsee them. I'm not talking about just a momentary insightful flash. I'm talking about understanding a principle that you continue to see at play whenever you think about it, and whenever you look at your behavior or the behaviors of the other or the unfolding of life, you just see it at play. So each time you see that principle at play and it holds true, then the understanding that that's how life unfolds goes deeper and deeper and deeper. So we have enough understanding of some basic things like some of the laws of physics in very practical terms, that we know that if we knock a glass off a table, that once it gets to the edge of the table and is not supported by an upward moving force that is equal and opposite to the force of the downward force of the glass, the force of gravity is going to pull the glass to the ground, and if the glass accelerates and hits the ground with sufficient force, the glass will break. And so we understand and we see that. It's not a surprise when the glass falls and the glass breaks. It's not a surprise to us because we understand the mechanics at play. And the mechanics at play that we seem to not appreciate as part of our development is that the human being in each moment is a very complex biological instrument. Now, I can't, well, I won't say I can't understand. What is baffling is that this fact is so hidden, and yet I would suspect that with an explanation it should be quite clear that we are a very complex biological instrument, grown, designed, not by ourselves, but by something else. Something else produced us. And once the blueprint was produced or was created, and the go button was pressed, the organism started to grow. And so in each moment, we are, according to how life or a creator has formed us, but we're not how we have formed ourselves. We simply didn't design ourselves. We didn't grow ourselves. And our up-to-date conditioning was delivered moment after moment, depending on the circumstance that we found ourselves in. And we were unsure of what the next circumstance was going to deliver in every moment of our life. So this talk is an example of that. I can say pink elephant next. I bet you no one thought I'd say pink elephant next. But I did, and that's proof that you never know what's coming next. And whatever comes next is new conditioning in life that may get you to, will get you to function according to your up-to-date conditioning. And your up-to-date conditioning is the cumulative effect of all the new conditioning that is coming in moment after moment after moment. So we have been conditioned by our parents, by us, the society we grew up in, by the school we went to, by the religious and social and political factors of the country that we grew up in. And we didn't choose which parents to be born to, which country to be born into, what the various cultural norms and political systems are. And throughout our life, we are being bombarded by new conditioning coming from all of those factors that we found ourselves amidst. So I think it should be fairly simple for us to realize that the human being that is speaking right now, the human being that feels things at particular points in time, is created. And therefore, the thoughts, the words, the feelings are a result of its structure that it is a result of and didn't create. And it's the deeply ingrained belief of personal doership that prevents what I'm saying should be a fairly simple logical conclusion to come to based on a fairly simple observation and thought experiment. It is the deeply ingrained belief of personal doership that makes us go, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't quite understand this non-doership business. So non-doership is an attitude towards what happens that is the absence of the attitude that says, that was my doing. Now, I'm not saying that the body doesn't do things. The body speaks. The body knocks glasses off table by mistake or intentionally. And so it is the body that is doing that, but the body is doing that based on its design and the circumstance it finds itself in. And so it couldn't have happened differently. So this I'm not the doer means there isn't an entity there that gets to choose of its own free will. We do choose in a particular moment because there are options that are presented to us, but that choice is the choice that the biological instrument, based on its genes and up-to-date conditioning, and its preferences are part of its genes and up-to-date conditioning, the biological instrument picks one of several options, and the one it picks we can say is a choice, but it's the only choice that could have happened. And we might say, well, it could have picked something else, and we say, well, it didn't, because it was designed a particular way with certain preferences. The circumstance was a particular way, presenting certain options and having certain other influences in that moment, and that was the choice. So for it to have been a different choice, things would have needed to be different, maybe just slightly different. Maybe a person, if someone was standing on our right in a different scenario, so in the scenario where we picked option A, that was because of our makeup in that moment and circumstance. Now, if you added in one more person that was standing next to us, maybe we would have picked option B. But if everything was the same, then the result would be the same, which means the result is not a willy-nilly, it is a result of a computation, essentially, a very complex calculation based on all of the complex dynamics in that moment. And so it's like, if you stick in 10 numbers into a calculator in the same order with the same signs in between them, the calculator will spit out the same number each time. You can't say, oh, well, to the calculator, you should have given me a different answer. So, and then you say, let's try again, and you put in exactly the same, you replicate the calculation, you'll get the same answer again. But if you change something, then the answer can be different. And so, whatever happens is a result of things being the way they are. And if this is understood, then the thought, oh, I should have done it differently, the regret, just doesn't have a basis on which to arise. The regret says, oh, I could have done it differently, and me as the doer failed. I should have picked something else. That's because there is this idea of me, the one that is independent, essentially like the man behind the steering wheel, controlling the body or the person. And that imagined identity says, oh, I picked the wrong choice. But that entity doesn't exist. It's just the biological instrument that chooses according to its makeup and the circumstance. Oh, well, there we go. Let's see if we have any questions. Hello, Holger.
Hello, Roger. Thank you so much for your clarity and your consistency.
You're welcome.
Some days ago, you had a very short satsang,
Mm-hmm.
or last week. I don't keep track of time. And I just wanted to tell you that this was really good. I enjoyed it. It was very focused and gave me a lot of time during the day I listened to it, I think, twice during the day, and had enough time because it was just half an hour or so. I really liked it. And another thing, your Zoom room is available the whole day. So it would be a possibility for other people, maybe when they are, I don't know, have the extra time, maybe just to look and see if someone else is maybe available. So this could be a nice meeting place for other people.
Yes, sure. If I don't, it's there, so it's a good idea. Now everyone knows. Let's see if anyone turns up. You might have to hang around in there for a long time.
Sure, but this happened on Sunday, for example. I met with Gad the same time, like same satsang time, and we just talked together like for 2 hours, and it was so beautiful. I mean, not to nurture my ego here or something, but just to speak up and to see maybe where there are misunderstandings and this really was good. I mean, like you say, the day is the laboratory, and so then once in a while maybe you need to talk about the things you discovered.
Yes, well, feel free to enter the room. I don't know what else to say about that. If you have any suggestions, then you can air them. So obviously on the Friday and the Sunday when there's no satsang, it makes sense that if people want to see who's in the room at that time, that's a centralized time where I guess there's the highest probability of people being there.
Sure, and just an idea, and because otherwise having a satsang with you is enough food to keep me busy for a long time. You said last time, you said as a response to a question, oh, I need to think about this. This was your reply. And I just want to know how you do this during the day when you think about something. I mean, you just have the plan, oh gosh, I want to think about this certain topic. You sit down somewhere, and then how does it work out? How do you do this?
Well, I mean, I find I can think more or less when I'm doing anything, unless what I'm doing requires other thinking. But, you know, you can be driving your car and think about a thing. I can be walking and thinking about it. I can be in the garden and thinking about it, or in the shower and thinking about it. Is that not your experience?
So no, but it sounded so like you are so determined. I mean, I need to think about this. Now, normally my thinking always just maybe, I don't have the feeling I'm in control. I mean, it just pops up. It comes like a flash. I'm interested in it. So I don't sit down. I was just wondering if this is something you do on purpose to sit down to think about something. That's the only idea.
No, if I sit down, that's a result of a spontaneous feeling to sit down. So it happens the same way as for you. Nothing is in my control. But what you can find is that there are some things that happen consistently, and it doesn't mean that you're in control. But you know, I do find myself contemplating what may be effective ways of expressing certain things. I mean, mind you, I very rarely think about satsang, what I'm going to say in satsang, but in general, I would think about the concepts and see how they usually apply. The concept can apply to different ways of interpreting it. That's what I quite like about this framework is, you know, source, for example. Everything is happening according to source, or according to God's will. And someone might interpret it as the will of a supernatural God. And there is space for that. And further on, you might say, well, I don't really believe in a supernatural God. What if this is some sort of virtual reality where there is actually another person in another reality, let's say, dreaming, and we are the result of them dreaming. So in that case, they are my God. So what we see is the concept, everything is happening according to God's will. We say, oh, that doesn't have to be the God I believed when I had a certain description of God previously. We can then say, oh, and if this is an experience of someone in a virtual entertainment shop, let's say, then they are my God. And the same, you know, the same can be said where it says in Christianity, I think in Christianity, we are created in the image of the Father. If there is an external reality, and this is a reflection, so this is different to the virtual reality version where there's someone in a entertainment shop in the year 2300, let's say. Put that aside. Let's say the table and the chair and the trees are a representation of an external base reality that exists, a physical reality. Then what hopefully is clear is that our awareness of the tree, the image of the tree, is a reflection of that. It is a simulated version of the tree, because the data from the tree, light, comes into the eyes, into the brain, and then the brain produces a rendered version of the information that comes in. and it fills in the gaps and it makes it comprehensible to us. Now, we don't know what the actual version looks like, but that means that the person that I know is not the base reality entity. It's the image that has been created. It's the subjective experience that has been created. So if it is a direct reflection of what's out there, then I am in the image of the Father. What I know myself as is a reflection of what is really out there. And what is really out there would be my God. So let's say there is a Roger. So if this is a reflection of what the eyes see, then in theory, my hand looks or has properties that, well, you never really know what the subjective experience of the hand, how accurate, what components are left out. Maybe because it's convenient to leave out certain components of the base reality. But let's say the hand is a reflection or an image of a real hand in the world, then the body is a reflection of the real entity. So I am made in the image of the Father. Now the Father in that case is not necessarily God in heaven. Now, frankly, if I'm if it is God in heaven, you don't expect him to look like me or us, really. Whereas if we take it literally, I'm made in the image of the Father, it makes it seem like the God in heaven must look like humans. We can say that, oh no, in the image of the Father means the consciousness of God is the consciousness that runs through the human. So there are so many different ways of interpreting. And so just this this explanation I'm giving you is a result of the fact that obviously I've thought about this. So during the day, I sometimes think about these things and then it turns into satsang.
The idea you entertain about yourself is a limitation of your thinking.
Yes.
Good. And you say we are created. You didn't make it yourself. I mean, the hands, the eyes, the brain. So
Sure.
but
Not at least the one that is aware, Roger here, I had no hand in any of that. If I did, I've forgotten all about it. But the point is I didn't, right? Because I am a result of whatever is there.
So what then about the idea that you are God and you just forgot about it, and we are just here to wake up again to our true identity?
Well, I'm on board really with the fact that we're here to develop, to change from what we are when there is suffering. What we call that, in satsang, it is sometimes convenient to refer to remembering what we truly are. But these concepts are they're fallible from certain angles. We'd say, well, it's not really like that. So we're really, in my view, we're here to change, and hopefully we change such that there is a more optimal experience. And the methodology by which that change happens is often teachings. And so the teachings will say things that are, let's say, most effective to bring about the change. So referring to our true nature might be an effective concept. But the reality is that I don't think we have a true nature. We have whatever nature exists at a particular point in time. And So if the belief in personal doership is present, that really is our nature in that moment. The belief of personal doership plus everything else that's there. And then it changes, and let's say the belief in personal doership dissolves. So from one point of view, we can say, oh, what is left is the true nature that was there even when the personal doership belief was there. And that's useful to look at it like that, because it highlights that which falls away, and it highlights that which has been recognized. The truth is that when, or I don't know if it's the truth, but more accurately speaking, is that which is left behind is a changed version of what was there before. And so none of them are original. We're always changing.
But the personal
And even the
doership is
sense of
just the
self.
software.
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you. And the personal doership is just the software.
But so's the sense of self. I mean, we've been conditioned because, as I said, teachings need to say certain things. The sense of self is probably no more fundamental than the belief in doership. We just, you know, some teachings have told us that playing on how we experience the sense of self and awareness when there are awakenings, they'll tell us that, you know, they are unchanging and they're original and they're the essence and the truth. As we move forward, we'll eventually, hopefully, come to see that even the sense of self may not be primordial. The sense of self or awareness may not predate the body, and it may be, and they all simultaneously arise, which means to me it's more practical to see it as a continuous process of change, where there is always just the combination of everything manifesting as who we are, and that who we are, if it includes the personal doership, will suffer. And when it changes, then there is a combination of factors, which is who we are, and some of the factors that were there before just aren't present. So, you know, I'm sure there's plenty of people that would say, no, you know, awareness and being are sort of sacred and are not biological or subject to change. And I think that view changes as we mature and question and look at different possibilities.
So there is a difference between the sense of self and awareness being aware of itself?
No. I mean, I wouldn't expect people to run with what I'm saying here, because the experience when there is awakening is different to what I'm saying. The experience itself feels like awareness is very different and on a separate plane to, let's say, our thinking. Now, I'm not saying that they're the same thing. Awareness is not the same as thinking, but there is always a package where these things coexist, and we can conceptually separate them. But the truth is that, or once again, I won't use the word the truth is, but as I see it, when we go beyond conceptually separating everything into this and that, and it just is one big whatever it is. And I guess if we stop separating and see that it is all one thing, then that's when the experience that previously told us one thing, then we go beyond the experience and realize that experience is not something to be trusted. We're always having experience, and it tells us one thing, pre-seeking. It tells us something else during seeking, and it tells us something else post-seeking. So experience is not to be taken as some sort of reflection of truth. Usually experience is actually a reflection of how everything sits in our head at a particular point in time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Roger. I have to digest it.
Sure. Thank you, Holger. Hi, Frank.
Hey, Roger, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. Thanks. I want to say thank you so much for this. This is a great satsang for me today. I'm getting so much. It's just opening up my mind in such a huge way.
Good.
I just ran from one room to another, so I'm a little bit out of breath right now. I wanted to ask you about, you brought up Christianity. I'm not really, I wouldn't consider myself a Christian, but I've studied the Bible, and I've actually, I think I had told you this before, that my mom was healed of cancer. I mean, there was really no other explanation why she was healed other than the prayer, because she had a huge cancer, and when they actually went to operate on it, it was down to a pea size. And even the doctor today says that my mom was healed by something other than medicine. He can't explain why she was healed. So having experienced things like that, and so my question to you today is about the word dominion keeps coming up to me. The dominion is a word that's used in the Bible a lot to and I'm sure you know what it means, but having sort of like control over, like if you're sick, you have dominion over that illness. If you have, like Jesus walked on water, that's an extreme case of having dominion over circumstance. But so the thought is along those lines of having dominion and some kind of control over anything that's not so-called God created. What do you think about that in relation to this teaching? How that I guess it's sort of like law of attraction in a way. It's like sort of controlling your circumstances in a way. So what do you think about that? And I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I don't think we have any dominion over anything except as destiny dictates.
So anything that happens along those lines is all just destiny. So if somebody gets healed of a disease, it's just destiny. And but the fact that somebody actually decided, hey, I'm going to pray over this person, and I'm going to use that whatever Christian technique to heal, to pray over this person, and it happens. That only happens because it's predetermined. But that's still somebody going out of, having, believing that they have dominion over this thing. But in this case, it's a disease. So I'm still a little bit clouded around that whole idea.
Yeah, because what happens is we tend to mix things up. If you toss a coin and you call heads and then it comes up heads, then for you to say, well, I had dominion over the coin toss is a mistake, right?
So, because my whole, my whole plan, let's say, as I get older, was to have more and more control over my.
Sorry, Frank.
Yeah.
You broke up, so I didn't hear your answer to the. So if you toss a coin and it comes up heads after you called heads,
yeah,
does that mean you had dominion over the coin toss?
No, in that case, absolutely not. I mean, to me, that's very clear that it's just just all chance and destiny or whatever you want to call it. But when somebody goes, let's say somebody decides they really want, like the idea that Jesus had this idea that there was, well, at least it was written, and who knows if Jesus even existed, but the idea that of dominion, of having dominion over your material circumstances, like the idea of walking on water, which I know is, it's a parable, but there was this whole idea in the Bible. There is this idea in the Bible that you have dominion over anything in your life that's not created by God, who is supposedly all good. And I know you've said before that that's just wishful thinking that God is all good. But so there is no sense of dominion. There is no dominions in life, is what you're saying.
Well, except as deemed by destiny, and destiny is always happening through our actions. So what that means is if I have the intention to dig a hole in the garden, I can go out, if it's destined, and dig that hole. And so in that case, we can say, well, I had dominion over digging the hole. But we can also understand how I can have the intention of digging the hole, and it may never happen. And so I say it will happen according to destiny, and yet that doesn't mean that in some circumstances it won't appear as if you have dominion. And more importantly, so this comes down to, so we have to live life as if we have dominion over things. Otherwise, we wouldn't. We just wouldn't function the way we're meant to function, as if we have dominion over things. When things then don't work out, that's when we can bring in the attitude of non-doership, which essentially means attitudinally we understand we never had ultimate dominion over anything. So the guilt and the blame doesn't arise. However, in practical terms, you can't go out into life saying, I have no dominion, otherwise you'll never get in your car.
Okay. That's an interesting take on that.
So you have to live your life as if you have dominion, knowing that you don't.
Yeah, I get the paradox there. Yeah. Okay. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Roger.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Hi, Philip.
Hey, Roger. Give me 1 minute to actually get out of bed and go to the living room. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I can.
Your satsangs do happen at quite the ungodly time for me, since I live in California, so it's like 7 a.m. here right now. All right. Hang on. Sorry. All right. So I have some questions about some sort of side concepts that you mention every once in a while that don't seem like central to the framework, but very interesting regardless. And so one of the concepts that you mention every once in a while is that suffering sort of kicks in when we're 2.5 to 3 years old, and we learn to speak and conceptualize, and it makes a lot of sense. But I was just wondering if that concept is something you sort of inherited from Ramesh, or if it's based on your own observation or something else.
Well, all of the concepts, well, not all of them, some bits of the teaching are not from Ramesh, but a lot of what I say is what Ramesh used to say. But I don't say any of it as just a repeat of what he says. It needs to make sense to me. And I haven't had direct experience, but lots of anecdotal evidence of parents who, talk about the terrible twos, which seems to be the time when a child between 2 and 3 develops what we would call the ego, where it suddenly starts referring to itself as me and mine, and whenever something is taken away from it, it'll tantrum as if, not just because it doesn't have the pleasure of it, but because it's losing something it has identified with. And until that point in time, it seems like the psychological me hasn't completely ground into place. And I think that it's simply a developmental thing where there's been sufficient experience and feedback to create over that period of time, those 2-3 years, a sense of what I am, because it's shown up regularly enough, and then understanding objects and what objects deliver in terms of pleasure, and understanding that you can sort of claim psychological ownership over things. So that's why, that's why the concept is there, that says the sense of personal doership sets in at about 2 to 3 years old, and it is part of the development based on this feedback loop of experience. And the absence of that is pretty evident when you see a newborn infant sort of staring aimlessly into space with no sense of their body. And you can sort of see that the consciousness or the awareness hasn't quite figured out what objects are what, and it hasn't received enough tactile feedback yet to realize that the body is somehow different to a lot of the external objects. And I think it's just a matter of development, which really means cumulative experience, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it certainly makes a lot of sense to me. Just hearing you talking about it right now, I'm wondering though, so, based on your description, since obviously this hasn't happened for me, but even after suffering falls away, there is still sort of a sense of being a person, with a set of preferences and, memories of what you've done. And would you say maybe that, when the sense of personal doer kicks in, like that's really sort of just a bifunction of developing the sense of being a person, like in, let's say, in theory, in a world with different conditioning, do you think like the sense of being a person would still develop around that same age without this additional load of, okay, but I also need this and that to be complete, sort
of? So this question of is there a sense of being a person is, if we look into it, the reason that so many seekers at a certain point of the journey would say there is no person, is because prior to a certain shift that they might have had that is leading them to say there is no person, the experience of life was something very particular, which is they know themselves as a person. So let's say before seeking, and in the first part of the seeking, they know themselves as a person. Now, the construct, the totality of the person includes the deeply ingrained belief of personal doership and attachment to outcome, which means that person, the experience of being a person, includes the narrative of I need this, life should be like this, why is this happening, do that. All of the noise of believing oneself to be firstly the physical identity, and then a physical identity that needs all of these things in order to be complete, and a physical identity that believes itself to be the doer, and a physical identity that sees the other to be the doer. So all of that is crammed in, and it is the experience of being a person. And spiritual teachings, some of them will take the approach of saying you are not a person, because what they're really pointing at is what pervades the sense of being a person is this doership and attachment to outcome. It basically contaminates the whole experience of being a person. So essentially, what I'm saying is, when we know ourselves as a person, we know ourselves as the doer and needing things to be happy. And so teachings will undermine that by saying you are not a person. And what they're undermining really is all of the psychological noise. They're saying, let life be as it is. Be the witness of life. Don't be involved in life. Don't be attached to outcomes. Leave all of your stories of life aside. Don't believe them. Time and space isn't real, so causality isn't real. So all of your stories of blame can't be real because it's based on a false presupposition. And if someone engages in that for long enough, a shift will happen where the habitual, deeply ingrained habit of seeking life to be different falls away. And in that falling away, the experience of life feels different. And it feels, so then what it's replaced with is a sense of the person that I knew myself as not being there, right? Because that's dissolved, it's fallen away. And so because that's the only way we knew ourselves as a person, was with the belief in personal doership, when that falls away, we say, the person has fallen away. Because our idea of person is doership and attachment to outcome. Now, I'm using the word person in a more generic sense, I guess, a more lowest common denominator sense. So I'm not using the word person to describe the psychological me movement. I'm using the word person to describe the 10-year-old, the 30-year-old, the 50-year-old, the 80-year-old body and its intellect and the being and awareness that is all combined as a single unit that is still very much there when after certain realizations. So to me, the word person is the one that gets into bed at night, and the one that gets out of bed, the one that opens the fridge, says hello to its friends. That to me is a person. And so there are 7 billion persons in the world, and if all 7 billion became enlightened, there would still be 7 billion persons in the world, but they would be 7 billion persons without the belief in personal doership. So my thing is that we will always be a person. However, there can be a person with the belief in personal doership, and after certain changes happen, there's a person without the belief in personal doership. So I can't even remember what your question was, but I hope that helps answer it.
I mean, yeah, I do definitely understand sort of what you're talking about, at least intellectually. The question was like, I guess, because you said the person, even in your more limited description, includes the intellect and sort of, your knowledge of how to do a car and stuff like that. But like, earlier you described, if you look at like a 1-year-old baby, they basically have sort of no idea of what they are. And I was just wondering, this sense of personal doership kicks in, if that's just a byproduct of developing broader sense of, okay, I am sort of like a human being with a body and an intellect. And, then plus like the psychological noise sort of also kicking in at age or something. I mean, I guess hypothetical sort of anyway.
Yeah, so I would say that we're always going to develop into more. So from a baby is going to come in contact with the body as part of the development. So it wasn't there, and then they start noticing the body more as something specifically to them, and then thinking and language comes in. The belief in personal doership, I think, is because there's no interfering factors that mitigate the belief of personal doership setting in amidst the experience, the actual feedback of experience that we have as a growing child. Now, that feedback of experience is very important to get us to develop as a person, and then the belief in personal doership becomes part of that. So if we had parents that understood themselves better, or had gone past the belief in doership and attachment to outcome, they would be able to mitigate the development of this doership and attachment to outcome based on the conditioning they delivered to their child. Now, I don't think they're going to be able to mitigate it from happening in the first place, because the child would be too young to absorb the concepts that would be needed. However, it probably wouldn't go as wild as it does. It would start off like it does, so the kids would probably still go through this period of terrible 2s and 3s, but then once they start developing an intellect that is more and more capable, so at age 4 and 5 and 6, the parents can start introducing concepts that then start interfering with the further development of the doership and attachment to outcome. So this is what I suspect would happen automatically as humanity becomes more and more aware of the dynamics of life, because, let's say, there are general education programs that highlight these facts, which just that we will learn things very quickly once it becomes mainstream. The non-acceptance of things is easy when it's not mainstream, but once people we respect start telling us this is the way it is, we will start contemplating it and change quickly. But at the moment, there aren't enough people saying this is the way it is. And the ones that do are still fringe and seem to be a little bit kooky and crazy. But as that happens, I think children will be born into environments that don't support the irrational development of the doership and attachment principle, except for in the very early stages when it can't be helped.
Yeah, thank you. That beautifully answers the question. I did have another question about a sort of side concept that in like over 100 hours of listening to you, I've only heard you mention it really 2 or 3 times, but it's very interesting to me. So if you could say a few more words about it, and that's the concept that suffering can sort of hide away in large muscles or muscle groups.
Right. Yes. That's my experience, and from hearing what other people have to say, it does seem like as this process happens, people will talk about, and it's specifically my experience that I start to see the correlation between energy releases or emotional releases and muscle tension. And so I spent several years doing deep tissue massage to myself and seeing the correlations, the effect of that. And it did seem like energy would shift from one part of the body to the other, and it would tend to find resting places in muscles that were either big or deep. And I remember one period of time I found myself eating differently on a diet where I lost about 10 kilograms while I was doing this deep tissue body massage. And as I lost weight, I found that I was able to penetrate deeper into areas that I couldn't have when I had more weight on or more muscle. And my observation was, oh, this is interesting. The loss of weight seemed to happen in correspondence with what was needed in the journey for me to get down deeper into the body structure, which seemed to me to be some sort of memory bank of the unresolved fears, desires, expectations, essentially the attitude of doership and attachment to outcome to events that have happened in the past that were locked away or not processed, were locked away as doership and attachment to outcome attitudes to past circumstances, including what seems to me to have been memories of another person's life at different periods of time, whether they were actual memories of an actual life at a previous period of time, or whether it was just a spontaneous vision of something like that, but it wasn't actually of a past life, who knows? So all of these things I'm saying are what appear to be correlations. So it appeared to me that these energies were stored in muscles. I don't have anything more than repeated correlations that indicated that. So I think it's good enough for people to investigate and confirm. Often it's a confirmation for people where when it's put into words, they say, yes, that happens to me as well. And of significance, I would find it took quite some time to realize the correlation between this massage and the movement of energy that would sometimes release itself, because there was often a delay of 4 or 5 hours. And because that delay was there, at first it was harder to link the two activity, or the activity of the deep tissue massage and then the release. It was harder to link them together. But once that link was made, then I would expect the change in emotion 4 or 5 hours later. And so when it came, it was, there it is. So yeah, don't expect it to necessarily be instantaneous, but sometimes it is. If you can press it and it's painful, it can sometimes spontaneously turn into an energetic release.
Very, very fascinating. Thank you for talking a little bit more about that. I have one final question. I hope it's not too annoying, but last time we talked, I asked you about any recent, strong emotional pain, and you really struggled to come up with anything. And so afterwards, I talked about this on your Discord server that we keep mentioning here, and someone, told me that you had described in the past sort of strong emotional pains, like right after liberation, like that you had like a relationship fall apart and stuff like that. And I'm just sort of more keen to hear about your personal experience with emotional pain, like absence of suffering, if you can.
I remember the question, and then I remember afterwards thinking, oh, that was, I think it was like, when my dogs maybe died, I remember thinking afterwards, oh, that would be a good example to have used. So maybe that's appropriate. I'm not exactly sure whether that was the example that had come up. which I didn't mention when you asked. But let's take that. So
this sounds like a good example because my dog is running around crazy here.
Yeah. So I had dogs for 10 years, and they passed away or died, and it's funny because even that wasn't too emotional, in the sense that I was overseas when the first one had to be put down, and I asked the person that was housing to tell me what the vet said, because you know, I'll go with the vet's recommendation, because I don't find, I didn't, to me it wouldn't make sense to just not put the dog down if that was the vet's recommendation, because I was attached to the dog, let's say, which I can understand may be the experience of some people, maybe many people, that in a way they're not putting the dog down for themselves. And so my response in that situation was very clear. Ask the vet what his opinion is, given the circumstance, because I knew he wasn't emotionally attached. And it came back and said, I would euthanize the dog. So that was it. I said, yes, go ahead. Let's do that. And I wasn't in the country. And it was sad, I guess. Well, it was sad, but it seemed very much part of life to me. So I was sad, but not wiped out. And then there were a couple of moments in the day where I had a cry. And so that's an emotion, like emotional sadness, let's say. But even in the cry, there wasn't a bitterness, or it was a sadness with a base of love, I guess, to it, or appreciation of the time I had the dogs, and it wasn't long lasting. And I think it was the same with relationship breakups, where it always seemed to make sense for whatever reason, even if it wasn't what I wanted. I could see, okay, well, the breakup is happening because either I want it or the other person wants it, or we both want it. And so even if I don't want it, but they want it, then that makes sense. It's like a relationship requires two people to want it. Otherwise, it's not a good relationship. And so we don't want bad relationships. So it's just, we're not in control of what the other feels. I don't, as you well know, I don't think the other is in control of what they feel. And so if it turns out that one of the parties or both of the parties don't want to be together, then that's life. It might not be what feels good. It can feel sad, but emotional pain, to me, doesn't penetrate to the level of feeling uncomfortable with yourself. I don't know if I've mentioned it. One time I had, this is going back, I don't know, 15 years or so, but received an explanation from an ex-girlfriend who I had broken up with, and she explained, she lived overseas, and explained that she had met someone else, which she hadn't told me about, and at the end of it, she sort of signed off saying, I hope you don't hate me. And when I read it, the thing was, this last thing was, I hope you don't hate me. And my sense was, I have to tell as quickly as possible that I completely understand, because I had this sense she was feeling guilty or suffering over it. And so I didn't even get inside before I was texting her to say, I get it. It's okay. I don't hate you. But I was sad because it was confirmation that the relationship was over. But at the same time, so what I'm trying to get is that emotional pain is in a way no different to biological pain, in that it isn't pleasurable, it is part of circumstance. It's not going to feel pleasurable, but it in and of itself doesn't lead to an uncomfortableness with oneself. It's the attitude towards the circumstance, it's the attitude towards the emotional pain that is the uncomfortableness with oneself, if it's going to be there.
Yeah, thank you. That's all I've got for today. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, we'll take one more question, I think. Hi, Schumann.
Well, hello, Roger. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes. It was just, I'm reading a book at the moment, and it's to do with the psychologist Jung, and the very famous psychologist Jung, and what he came to see by looking at many of the people who came to him. And it's very interesting. He said he got the sense that there really is no such thing as free will. And he said everything is predetermined to the smallest degree. He was quite emphatic about it, but it's very interesting that it had, he was able to see that so clearly, and the way he emphasized it, there's just not even a slight element of free will. Obviously, there's illusion that I'm a doer, but it is completely determined. Now, for me, in my practical life, because in theory, it makes absolute sense that everything is predetermined. But I've noticed in my practical life, for example, especially when I'm going off to bed and dozing off, I noticed, like, if I was hurt by someone, that there is the brain, there's like a commentary which says, oh, that person was very unkind. It was a bit cruel what they did. They couldn't help it, but it still doesn't stop it from being unkind. So I looked at, why is it coming up? And it's to do with blame. The thing just, there's blame coming up. I'm blaming them for delivering some hurt to me. But I noticed that what's given it strength is the fact that the opposite of blame is guilt, and that I'm susceptible to feeling guilty. Like if I did something to someone, I was to realize that I was unjust, that I treated them badly, I would feel very guilty about it. And I would think, oh, no, I shouldn't have done that. I can see that it was wrong. And because I have that, I put it to the other person.
Sure.
And
yes.
that's where the blame comes for the other person. So I noticed there's a subtlety there, and that's how it gains life.
Yes, that's right. It's because we see ourselves as the doer, and so therefore we project that onto the other. So if we didn't see ourselves as the doer, we wouldn't feel guilt towards ourselves, and therefore we wouldn't feel blame towards the other. And usually it's the dissolving of one of those dissolves first before the other dissolves. So you might find you can more easily let something the other does go without blaming them. So for some people that falls away first, and yet they still find themselves feeling guilty for a while. And eventually, because you've seen the other isn't the doer, it can translate such that your own guilt falls away, or vice versa. Your own guilt falls away first, and then the blame towards the other falls away. But they're very linked. So, you know, both of them are based on the belief in personal doership.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I've noticed also blame doesn't arise if, for example, if the other person, if I perceive them, if they, for example, if they have mental health problems and they do something that's cruel, there's no blame arises because I would say they really aren't responsible for their actions. You know, I've noticed there's that there. But if I perceive someone as, say, for example, they're quite spiritual, then it does arise. You know, I do. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, in practical terms, I do. Theoretically, I can see that there's no doer, but in practical terms, I do.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, if a branch falls off a tree and breaks your leg, it's very hard for us to blame the tree, right? Because we understand it's just physics that pulled the tree branch down because of the weak wood and the force of gravity. If an animal was to attack you, it's easier to blame the animal than it is the tree, but less easy than blaming a human being. In the same way, if a young baby does something that delivers pain to you, it's harder to blame the baby simply because this sense of agency isn't there, especially with the tree. There doesn't seem to be an agent that delivered pain to you. So to the extent that we imagine an agent there, that's when the blame comes in. And so the descriptions that are given that say, you know, we are essentially like a tree in a physics universe, and our thinking and our actions are all influences of physics on a physical system. And so our thoughts are no different to, our thoughts arising are no different to the tree branch falling due to gravity. And it's really very simple, is that thinking is essentially electromagnetic pulses in an electromagnetic neural network. And how that network is formed and how the electromagnetic pulses go through the neural network and what thoughts arise is as impersonal as gravity acting on a tree limb. And because we don't see that, we haven't comprehended that, we haven't looked at our thinking that way. Instead, we look at it as, that's my doing. And we ignore the fact that there is a hugely complex control system, which is the brain, that is not in my control. We completely ignore that, flush it down the toilet, essentially, the idea that that is how it happens, and replace the accurate, the accurate concept of the dynamics, which is impersonal mechanics, and then we superimpose the notion, I did that, you did that. So you did that, it hurt me, I hate you. It's no less crazy than hating the toaster for it burning the bread, or hating the tree for it dropping a limb on you. And yet we're all crazy.
Yeah, I think I see that. I think part of where the illusion comes in is if you put a lot of effort into something. For example, I mean, so the previous questioner raised up the subject of dominion. So dominion means, for example, if I wanted to learn another language, a very difficult language, I'd have to put a lot of effort into it. And there is this idea of doing see that
Who,
it's not true.
who, who puts the effort in?
My desire puts the effort in. I have a desire to learn a language.
Who has the desire?
It is an energetic thing. Let me see. Who has the desire? Well, in my case, for example, I've just started learning Sanskrit, and it's because it's an ancient language. I just feel driven. I've got to study it.
Who's learning Sanskrit?
I am the person in my body. Yes, my persona.
So this is it. So what is your persona? Who is the persona? What isn't it? Is there a persona that is somehow independent of the biology?
No, it's not independent of the biology. It's closely entwined. Hence, I get the pleasurable feelings.
Yeah. So so to me, the motivation arises as a result of the biological makeup. So the desire for to learn Sanskrit doesn't belong to anyone except, you could say, the biological instrument. The biological instrument produced the desire or the motivation. And so when we look at who has the desire, you'll find there's no one there in the sense that you imagine. There is a biological instrument and then the desire. And what has been put in place is there's a biological instrument, there is a belief that there is something in between the biological instrument and the desire, and that belief of something in between is the imagined me. And so when I ask who is putting in the effort, you'll find the effort is put in by the biological instrument, and there's nothing in between the biological instrument and the outcome. So then we go, oh, who am I? So this question of who am I is like, really, yeah, who are you?
I mean, I have to rephrase it, because when I look at it in stillness, I can see that the sense of I is a complete illusion. It doesn't exist. And yet I do have a drive, for example, to know Sanskrit, to know about ancient civilizations. It just
arises. There is a drive. There is a drive. I don't doubt that. But whose drive is it? I say it's the body's drive.
Yes, it feels impersonal. I'm contradicting myself. I said it was my person, and yet the drive feels impersonal.
Yeah, and all the effort that's put in is not the effort of a doer, but the effort of a biological instrument. And that biological instrument wouldn't put the effort in if it's not designed to have the motivation to, if the motivation isn't there, then the effort doesn't follow. So what we think is my effort and my dominion is actually just a consequence of the biological instrument being a certain way. And if the biological instrument was different, you wouldn't have the motivation. And then you couldn't say, so when you see that as the option, you can then say, oh, it's not my effort as a doer, there just is effort happening. There is desire or intention or motivation there, but it's no one's motivation, it's no one's intention. the fact that it's no one's intention doesn't mean it's not there. And when I say no one, what I really mean is no one as a doer, but the body has that motivation, and it's there simply because the body is a particular way, and you or the body didn't control the body being that way. So basically, it's good luck or bad luck, depending on whether you like motivation or not. Do you like the motivation?
Oh yes, yeah, I enjoy it a lot. Yes, these things are a mystery to me. Ancient civilizations, and the fact that Sanskrit, because it's a dead language, but part of my motivation is I feel that there's something lost. I mean, I don't know what. That's just the feeling that comes from my body. It's just we've lost something, and that's why there's a drive in me, while we're on lockdown and I haven't got a job. I thought I'd better seize the opportunity.
So that's good destiny that you have that motivation and find those things interesting. But yeah, it's not because of a doer or a me, but rather because life has designed everything the way it is.
Yes.
So now the question of dominion shouldn't arise, because who has dominion? And we find there is no one to have dominion.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. I think I'll have to ponder on that. I'll have to ponder on it.
Very good.
Oh, thank you very much.
All right. Well,
thanks a lot. Thank
you're
you.
welcome.
Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome. Bye.